Hello and welcome to Expat Lens. Today on the podcast, we have a very special guest and a close personal friend of mine, Naoya. He is an expat in the sense that he has lived in many different countries, but his home nationality is Japan. He is a very intellectual man. I've learned so many things from him, always have great conversations, and as someone who grew up outside of Japan and then came back, I think he's going to be able to give us a very unique perspective on Japaneseness, on what it's like to be a member of the international community, and all sorts of other things. Hi, Naoya. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Pleasure.
Let's just start with one of the topics that I had prepared. And I kind of alluded to it a little bit in the intro, but as you are, in Japanese, we say kikokushijo, right?
Sure.
Do you want to explain what that is?
Well, it's a term, I don't know who coined the term, but it's for people who are basically returnees from overseas, Japanese returnees to Japan from overseas. And in schools, they consider kikokushijo to be, you're considered kikokushijo 2 years from when you returned.
Okay, so if you go abroad for 1 year and then you come back, you're not kikokushijo? You're not a returnee?
No. It's the other way around. You go abroad, live for a while, come back. You're kikokushijo for 2 years in Japan.
Ah, I see. Okay.
I think that was how it is. I don't know how it is at the moment, but I remember you can't say you're kikokushijo forever.
I see. Okay. What is it about? There's obviously no way to know for sure, but what is it about the 2 years that you think makes a difference? Was it ever explained to you?
I think it's due to the fact that how long the returnees, I'm just going to call it returnees for the sake of like the listeners, right? How long the returnees can maintain their English skill and how it's valid to like getting into schools and stuff. So say you went abroad, year passes by, you know a little bit of English, come back right away, maybe your English skill is pretty like intact, right? But would that be the same for it if you come back and 5 years pass by? Maybe it's not the case.
I see. Yeah, maybe you're going to lose some of that. After you came back, was there some kind of like, I don't want to say special treatment, but did they have like a program for you that was different from everybody else?
It depends on the school board.
Okay.
In the school district, in my case, I didn't go back right to my hometown. Born in Japan, I went to the States, Texas. And then when I came back, I didn't go right back to my hometown. Instead, I went to Kanagawa Prefecture. And I think my parents had to deal with the school board in Kawasaki or wherever that was. And they didn't have a program, but they had to do some assessments on me.
Okay. Was it like a Japanese test or something?
Japanese test, and it was kind of like reintegration assessment. So if my Japanese language is well enough to get back into Japanese public schools.
I see. And how was it?
It was okay.
Okay.
It was okay.
Did you go to Japanese school in the States? Like, did you go on Saturdays or it's like a extracurricular or something, right?
So I had lived the double life of going to Saturday schools. Every Saturday we had, my parents put me into a Japanese school called Hoshuko. It's I think it literally translates to Japanese supportive school. There we spend basically the whole day studying in Japanese curriculums.
Really? What times does it start from?
Like 9
until
9 a.m. to like 5 p.m.
Oh my god. That's like longer than a regular school day.
Yeah.
Gee whiz. Did you like it?
I liked it. I got to meet like normal Japanese folks. There was just a divide between my relationships, right? So in the public school, I have my round of friends. They all speak English, and on a Saturday, like it's like a Japanese world for me.
Interesting. So you kind of went into it a little bit. You made some allusions to, okay, you were in the United States and you were in Texas. At what age did you move there? And then your background is so interesting because it's so unique and you've been to so many different places. Would you mind giving just a brief overview of the experiences you've had living abroad? So we know Texas, but from what age?
Right. So I can't give you a concise explanation for my background. It's always the case. I was born in Japan, Japanese nationality, in the Hyogo prefecture. I lived there until I was 5. And I think at the age of 5, I went to the US. And my parents told me we were going to Disneyland. And
that's how they got you on the plane.
Yeah. And never came back for 5 years.
Oh, God.
Then after 5 years, came back to Japan. And like I said, didn't go back to my hometown, but went to Kanagawa prefecture, which is right next to Tokyo prefecture.
So when you came back, you were about 10.
Right about 10, end of 3rd grade.
Okay, yeah.
And spent like 2 years there until I was 6th grade, at least the beginning of it. Then my folks told me, hey, we're going to Canada. And
just like that.
Yeah.
Okay. This time, no promise of Disneyland.
No promise, but I completely assumed we're going to live in a log house.
Okay, so that was your image of Canada.
That was my image of Canada. So cold winters, log house in Canada, in the wild.
I see. Okay, while we're on the subject of like talking about what you imagined countries were like, when you're 5 years old, it's kind of hard to imagine what a place is like, but did you have any image in your head about the United States before you went there?
I think I had no clue.
So when your parents said, we're going to America, we're going to Disneyland, you're like, okay, cool. What is that?
No clue.
No clue.
No clue. Yeah. But I do, retrospectively, I do remember what the adults thought about it. At least recently, I heard what my grandparents thought about, or my parents thought about. So it was 90s, right? 90s, it was 97, I think. It was before the 21st century, so it was still this post-war kind of conception about the U.S.
Okay.
At least my grandparents had.
Okay, interesting.
So when we found out that we were going to the United States, my grandparents thought like, we're never going to come back.
Oh my gosh. Why though? Why did they think that?
Still for folks of my grandparents' age, like going overseas was a big deal.
Okay, so they expected the whole family's moving their life. You're going to the States. Goodbye. Maybe see you
another
for
life.
Oshogatsu or something, or another life. Yeah. Never see you again.
Wow. There was that possibility. At least they thought.
Wow, interesting. I guess it's a different generation, though. I suppose if you ask anyone who is born 1920s, 30s, something like that, your grandparents might have been, right? Like, if you move to another country, it's not like today where people, or at least I guess we, kind of jump back and forth between places for university or something. But that's interesting. You actually reminded me of something, like a kind of a personal story about like little kids and their understanding of foreign countries. So I have 2 nieces, or from my wife's sister, so my sister-in-law, and they're 4 and 6 years old. And the 4-year-old, she's very, very clever. And as you know, I was in the States for a little while earlier this year. And sometimes I would do like a video phone call with them.
Sure.
And sometimes the little girls would be on the phone too. And they'd be like, oh, where are you? I'd say, I'm in America right now. And there's a time difference. So, okay, they understood that there was a time difference about America. They understood that I was far away.
Sure.
And then they came to visit Kana and I in Kichijoji. And they're like, are we in America right now? And I was like, oh, that's cute. So they didn't really understand the concept of a foreign country, but they knew, okay, there's a different time. It's far away. That's where Jack lives. This is where Jack lives. This must be America.
Mhm.
So it's kind of interesting child logic. But yeah, I guess 4 or 5 years old, you don't really understand what another country is.
Sure, unless she meant Japan as a 51st state.
Yeah. Oh, maybe. Oh, by the way, did you ever end up going to Disneyland?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, good.
For like a week, I think.
So what happened after you came back? So you're 10 years old. You went to school here for a little while. Was there any reverse culture shock when you were 9, 10 years old?
In Kawasaki?
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot, I think. I mean, up until we came back, like officially, we did come back and forth over the 5 years. For like they call it ichiji kikoku, like a brief return.
Sure.
I think for holiday reasons that my dad had. He had to use his vacation.
I see. Yeah.
And maybe like a routine checkup, I think. But when I officially came back to Japan, the thing I was surprised is the amount of Japanese people everywhere, right? I didn't see that until I turned like 9 or 10.
Right. So you were more used to seeing many different kinds of faces, like Caucasians, Latinos. Was there a large African American community where you lived?
Not much. I don't know why, but the population was basically Hispanic.
Yeah, that makes sense.
For the most part. But my parents put me in a private school, and I think which is why I saw more Caucasian than other ethnicities.
Do you mind mentioning what kind of school it was? Because it's really interesting. I think it's really interesting.
It was a Christian school, a Protestant.
So this is so funny because every once in a while we'll talk about like, theology or religion or something. And you know so much more about Christianity than I do. Even though I'm technically Catholic, I've like never been to church. I've been to church like 3 times in my life.
You're such an abomination.
I know. But the good thing about Catholicism is it's like it's so sticky that you could never go to church and you're just a bad Catholic. It doesn't matter, But so you went to this private school. It's kind of a religious school. And your family is non-secular, right? Like, or Shinto, maybe? Does your family like follow?
That's what I'm trying to figure out. Even today.
Okay.
Maybe back then were we more religious, or more religious now? I still do question.
It is funny because, as I said, like, okay, technically I was baptized because at one time in my family's history, my mother and my father were practicing Catholics, but I never knew that, right? Because it wasn't part of my life growing up. So it is kind of an interesting question to ask, like, oh, what did your parents care about? Were they spiritual? Were they religious before you came along? And then did they just be like, ugh, I'm tired of this?
I think the more important thing back then was security.
Okay, interesting. You want to go into that a little bit? So
Texas, where we lived, Texas, 1 hour from the Mexican border. Not a safe place to live back in the 90s with the cartel and stuff. There were still trails of the cartel. I heard my dad had a couple of blackmails back then.
Really?
From the cartel or the families.
Because they knew that he was working for a Japanese company and
apparently when you get in contact with anyone in Mexico, they are connected to the cartel one way or another. That's what my dad told me.
Wow.
Also, there are like security concerns, and there were a lot of Japanese companies back then in the late 90s going overseas seeking business because in the early 90s, late 80s, the bubble popped.
Right.
And they were looking for foreign demands. But it was the infrastructure for the advancing Japanese companies overseas. It wasn't as developed as it is now. So we were basically sent to the middle of nowhere with no no contact.
I see.
So with their children, I think security was a main concern. So probably why they put me in a private school.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's fast forward a little bit. We're back in Japan now, and you're here for 2 years, and then you said that you left to go to Canada. One of our recent conversations, you told me that you got caught in a weird time gap between Canadian school and Japanese school.
Oh yes.
Or am I going too far forward here?
A bit forward. If you want to ask me about my life in Canada, we can roll back a bit.
Sure. So I guess I'll ask you the same question again. Or no, sorry, you already answered it. You had an image of Canada. You said it's a cold place. You're going to live in a log cabin. What was it actually like when you got there?
It was quite modern. Yeah.
If there's any Canadians listening to this, you've got a modern country.
I mean, we were in Toronto, of course, right?
Oh, right.
I didn't know at the time. I thought we were going to live in the middle of Saskatchewan or somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, but that's kind of adorable, Kids think Canada, there's going to be some moose, some polar bears, and I'm going to have to walk 2 hours to get to school through the woods, maybe. Who knows?
If I were to describe it in comparison to Texas, it was a modern city, of course, because it was Toronto, right? And Toronto is the main industry is finance. Basically, all the banks are there, and there's a bunch more Japanese population.
Okay, so there was a much bigger Japanese population in Toronto than
there was already.
Texas.
Back in Texas, we had to build up a Japanese community because we were like the frontiers. Japanese frontiers.
Interesting. So you, in some senses, had a very traditional American experience as potentially an immigrant going out into the quote unquote wilderness and then creating your community there.
Yeah. I would say so.
That's kind of funny, actually. Interesting. Okay, so you were in Canada for quite a bit shorter amount of time than in the States. 2 years, was it? 3 years?
2.5 to 3 years, I'll say. Yeah. So that was I can talk about the transition right there.
Sure, yeah, please.
Yeah, so before I was in Canada, I was in Kawasaki, right? In 6th grade, it was spring, I believe April or May, around that time. And then when you go to Canada, school year starts on a different month. So school year starts on September. And elementary schools are from 1st grade to 6th grade. So my timing there was at the end of the 6th grade curriculum. So my parents tried to get me into elementary school 6th grade, but since it was the end of their curriculum, the school board rejected me.
Okay.
I don't know if it was a rejection of sort, but they told us it's better for me to move on to middle school and take the months off. That's 4 to 5 months.
That's crazy. You kind of explained this period of your life to me a little bit. But would you mind talking about it again? Because it sounded kind of fun, actually. What did you do during those 5 months or 4 or 5 months where you had essentially no school, right?
No school, no public school, but I think I already did go to Saturday schools.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're going to Japanese school once a week?
Once a week.
And that was all the school that you had?
That was all my public life.
Wow.
And other than that, I didn't have internet. Right? I didn't have internet. I just had TV.
This was 99?
No, this was 2003.
Oh, okay.
2003 to 2006, I think.
Okay, yeah. So you didn't have internet at that time?
In the world, there was internet.
Sure.
But I didn't have access to internet yet.
Okay.
So at least not immersive access to internet. And all I had was cable TV,
Mm.
and I used to play table tennis.
Oh, really?
So that's all I did. Like, um, hit the walls with my ping pong. That's all I did for a couple of months.
So you must be pretty good at table tennis.
Table tennis playing alone, yes.
Okay. Okay. I see. All right. Was it hard for you to reintegrate into North American society after being gone for a little while, or did it feel more natural to be there as opposed to like coming back to Japan?
I mean, of course, as with any reintegration, I had to take off the rust. It also happened to me when I went to London, which I might talk later on. But
Sure. Yeah, see, folks, he's been everywhere.
it does take a while to get in the flow. Maybe because the English I had acquired up until that point was like Texican, right?
What is Texican English?
So, Mexican Texan English.
Did you like mix Spanish words in with your regular conversation?
Not me in particular, but I think it happened to my sister.
Really?
More. I don't remember much Spanish.
Okay. But your sister speaks Spanish, right?
My sister, we studied Spanish in college, so she does speak Spanish. But I think partly because we went to a private school, we had less exposure to Spanish.
I see. Yeah, I suppose that makes sense. If it's more enforced English curriculum, perhaps they're gonna ask the kids not to speak Spanish in class.
Well, anyways, so Texas culture, like it was the South, right? And all of a sudden, after 2 years, we go to like the North Pole, sort of.
It must feel like it, anyways, right? Yeah.
So like it was two opposing extremes, different culture. Like there was a different flow. So getting used to the like local flow was more of a challenge than the language. I mean, certain cultural idioms are different. Maybe because of the 2 years gap, I still need to like brush up, like catch up to the other people.
Did you use any English when you were in Kawasaki, when you came back to Japan, or was it kind of like, well, here's 2 years break, good luck?
In the like public school, none.
Okay.
Because
this is before they integrated English classes. Yeah.
No English whatsoever. But my parents did put me in a English classroom for returnees.
Oh, great. Okay, cool.
So that's where I met other returnees.
Was it easier to get along with the fellow returnees in Japan than with the other kids in school? Like, did you feel more camaraderie with them as opposed to just the regular kids at school?
Oh yeah. We can share and communicate like certain things without like mentioning them.
Do you have any examples of that?
If I would say like little things, right? I would say, did you watch Cartoon Network?
I see. Okay, yeah.
So I might have told you this before, but like those little cultural commonalities, like whether you watched Japanese comedy or American cartoons.
Right. I think that conversation we had, wasn't it a little bit later on in life, like not when you were a kid, or what was it when you were like still a teenager, or was it when you were more of an adult that you noticed that kind of like disconnect?
More significantly recently.
Okay. You know what? Let's fast forward and talk about that because it's kind of interesting as well. And if you don't mind, I want to set it up a little bit with one of our previous conversations. You told me that in university or in some of your previous jobs, when you first start interacting with someone, they just see you as normal Japanese person. You have regular Japanese, look Japanese, and then eventually it comes out in the conversation that you are one of these returnees. And then they start looking at you differently or treating you differently. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I did this experiment. I kind of feel bad for it, but
it's in the name of science.
I did this experiment when I moved on to university, and I thought, what if I didn't say that I have this experience abroad? Would they treat me differently? And I didn't speak of it for like 3 months.
Okay. This was right after you got into university?
Right after I got into university, and you know, like you have those freshman orientation stuff.
Sure.
And mingle with a couple of friends, and I didn't tell them anything about my past.
A man of mystery.
Like at least that I didn't tell them that I lived in Texas or Canada. And then I mean, eventually they'll start to notice, right?
Okay.
So
how did they notice?
English class.
Okay. So you're like getting 100% on every test. It's super easy when you talk. They're like, wow, your pronunciation is really good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like slowly revealing. And then at one point I explained to them. So there's this switch that clicks within them, I think. And I think that switch is stereotype.
What do you think the reason for that is? And if it's a stereotype, what is the stereotype, if you could imagine it, or if anyone ever told you specifically?
I mean, if you're a Japanese and you are considered and regarded as a Japanese from others, and you can't do certain things that Japanese people can do or should know, they will think you're stupid or not educated.
So it's like common knowledge stuff.
Yeah.
Do you have any specific examples of this, that you did or you didn't do something and people kind of gave you a weird look? Or
I think by the point I was in university, I was well educated.
Sure.
Enough to be Japanese, but I think it was back in when I was in elementary school. Remember I said we can go back to Japan from the United States,
and you were in Kawasaki or Kanagawa.
I was in my hometown. Like
okay.
We return every 1 or 2 years.
This temporary return thing. Yeah. Gotcha.
And I attended my aunt's wedding. It was that kind of occasion, and the groom's mother, I think, I tried to shake hands with her.
Okay.
So that's not a Japanese thing to do.
Right.
And maybe she thought I was a cowboy. And she told me that in Japan we bow. So those sort of mannerisms and I think social ethics.
It's funny because to this day you have an excellent handshake. Like, you have a really good, strong handshake.
That's a Southern in me.
I guess so. Yeah, the Texan coming out. Interesting. How do you feel about that kind of stuff now, though? Like, looking back on it, obviously, I think at this point you've spent more time in Japan than abroad, right? Is there a part of you that you feel like is always going to have this like extra non-Japanese element, or after coming back and reintegrating into society, and maybe you tell people that you used to live abroad, maybe you don't, some people notice it, some people don't, like, I guess I'm taking a really long time to ask this, but I guess, like, how do you see yourself? Like, how do you identify yourself as Japanese plus something extra, or any thoughts on that?
That's the difficult and complex question, right? So I think I didn't fully reintegrate, so I just learned to disguise.
Interesting. Even to this day.
To this day, and I do sort of enjoy that as well.
Again, the man of mystery comes out.
So you hear a lot of returnees having a hard time reintegrating and whatever that is, right? I think I learned to sort of take a step back and be more conscious of, because I took a step back, I'm more conscious of what Japanese is, right? That's why I approached it from an academic point of view. Socially, I don't address myself as a returnee in public.
When you say you kind of like handled this big identity question from an academic point of view, what does that mean exactly? Like, what did you do to understand yourself?
I don't know if this was the reason or not, but towards the end of university, I went to London to study anthropology, which was an interesting experience for me, because anthropology is the study of basically humans and human culture. Traditionally, they studied primitive tribes. I put that in quotes. But I ended up taking up my own Japanese culture as the subject of study, and ended up discovering more of the theoretical sides and historical sides of Japanese culture, which is very weird, by the way.
Yeah, we've had some pretty long conversations about this in the past. I would definitely like to get into that with you, but that could be a completely separate podcast, or like even, I mean, disregard just one episode. Like it could be an entire podcast in and of itself. Maybe a sneak preview, like without getting too deep into it. What were some of the things that you found that you thought were like weird or interesting?
The number of rituals that you can find. A ritual is a big part of study in anthropology, and there are lots of them in everyday life. Rites of passage is what I study mainly.
We've had some interesting conversations in the past directly connected to this rites of passage idea, and recently, maybe the last few years on the internet, we've started to see a boom in the consciousness of the word liminal space, liminality, which you were the one who introduced this to me before I ever encountered it on the internet. And I thought that was really interesting. And I guess that's kind of one of the things that you studied, right? Like these rites of passage. That's the traditional anthropological idea of liminality. And for anyone who's not familiar with this word, because it is still kind of a niche word, do you want to explain what it means?
So liminality was coined by, I forgot the guy's name, Marcel Mauss, but the word means threshold in Latin. And it describes places or concepts, time in between, and so, or existence in between.
Seems Arnold van Gennep, is that correct?
Arnold van Gennep. Arnold van Gennep. Yeah,
that's what I'm seeing.
He was
Victor Turner. Was that the other name?
Victor Turner was the guy who coined the word liminality or liminal, but the concept itself was described by Arnold van Gennep, and he Arnold van Gennep described the process of rites of passage in 3 stages. So there's a preliminal, liminal state, and post-liminal state, and this can be applied to time or space. And I was especially interested in this concept because as a returnee, like you move through space and culture, and I think some people, or maybe a lot of returnees, feel that they are in between, and this really illuminated my interest or my situation.
Maybe kind of like gave some answers to the question of yourself too, right? I think it's really interesting. And yes, this idea of being in between situations or periods of your life, anyone who has taken that step to go abroad or like live in another culture, either by choice or maybe you were brought along by your parents, you didn't have a choice. You are kind of like constantly searching for maybe stability, I suppose,
Sure.
right? Because you're not here and you're not there. So you're a man with a lot of experience in this situation. And so you said before, like, instead of fully reintegrating yourself, you choose to disguise your situation instead. So you can push back on this if you want, but does that mean that you are choosing to remain as a liminal human? Because you're not really fully in to the Japanese culture again, because maybe you can't. Maybe you're beyond it. You're something extra, right? Personally, I know that I feel that way as well, right? Like there's different reasons why I could never be Japanese. Speak it perfectly. Not that I do, but if I did speak it perfectly, maybe someone would think I was Japanese on the telephone, but then they meet me in person. They're like, oh, right. There's that immediate like, oh, I've identified you as something other. And you can disguise yourself, but sorry, I asked you a lot of different things. I'm going to bring it back around with a very simple question. Is it better to remain in that space for you personally as your own like sense of being?
I felt more safe in this like in between situation because I can get away with friction, right?
Okay.
So choosing one or the other means like you have to go full in. You have to choose sides. But if I can be in between, I really don't have to choose, and don't have to encounter conflicts if I choose to like go full in Japanese.
Okay. Do you have an example of what one of those conflicts might be by choosing to be a fully Japanese in your identity?
This comes back to the social experiment that I did.
Okay, great.
So, maybe I'm really not like as familiar with Japanese culture as my fellows. But if they regard me as like a Japanese, like a full-on Japanese, and notice something awkward about me, that's a conflict, right? But I can resolve that conflict by giving an excuse. So I've been living overseas for 10 years.
Okay, right. Yeah.
Which is not my ideal resolution, but I can get by.
So you have your own version of the gaijin card, right?
Yeah.
It's like this special thing like, hey, I'm a foreigner. Sorry, I didn't know. And you're like, sorry, I'm a returnee. I didn't know, right?
So like the things that I don't know that Japanese people should know, that's an area of conflict. Because they'll think that I should know, like joshiki, right?
Yeah. This common knowledge.
Yeah. I do hate the word.
Yeah, I do too. I'll go on a rant about that another day.
But by not knowing becomes like a strength for me. Because not knowing, but knowing something other than that, I can bring in a different perspective to the table.
That's very inspirational, and I think that that's a really healthy way of looking at a situation that we can't resolve, right? Like we are different, and there's nothing we can do. It's just the way that we are. But in a culture such as Japan, where it's not everyone, but generally speaking, correct me if you disagree, they value sameness over otherness.
Sure.
Right. And the group is always more important than the individual, et cetera, et cetera. I guess I have one final kind of big question here, and we've sort of been touching on it here and there, but I'll ask it more directly. Where do you feel most comfortable in terms of peers? Like, is it still with this group of folks who are returnees, who are Japanese but have experienced life abroad and then come back and they're like, I know exactly what it's like to be you? Is it more towards the international community as a whole? Or is it something else? Or have you not given it too much thought?
If you would consider like a community as like segregated groups, there are a spectrum of places that I feel comfortable. Like a complete Japanese group will feel distant from me.
Okay. Do you have an image of what that complete Japanese group might look like or might act like?
So, this is born in Japan, go to elementary school in Japan, and like all the rest, right? And for 18 years, their life revolves around a Japanese school system. But I can't relate to that upbringing. But I can relate more to people who have an interrupted upbringing or a non-traditional upbringing.
I suppose on that front, then, you and I are very similar because I've had a really weird education as well. I haven't talked about it before, so I guess I'll get into it. I also went to private school when I was young, and then I wwent to a charter school for a little while, and I hated it. And then I went back to the private school, and I'm like, I just hate school. So I was lucky enough to be homeschooled from 6th grade, actually. So, around the same time that you kind of had an extra upheaval, I did as well. So I did my middle school and my high school homeschooling. And then after that, I came to Japan. So being in this situation where, especially, I think one of the overarching themes that has been a major point of this conversation today is how important education is into forming identity, right? And your peer group as a young person, how you relate to other people, what you can connect with them on. That's always been kind of a weird thing for me as well. I always knew that I loved Japan, and I had friends who were speaking Japanese and studying Japanese, and that was great. But I was like, I want to go there. And then you come, and I had a lot of trouble connecting with people here as well, except for the other people who came, who maybe they weren't American, maybe they were from all over the place. But it was like that common interest or that common sense of not belonging, but wanting to belong to something was easier for me to find myself as an in-group.
So, kind of to belong to a group with the same desires.
Yeah, something along those lines. Our common language of communication, ironically, was English and not Japanese, even though all of us were studying Japanese. I think that's why it took me such a long time to get better at Japanese, because I kept falling back on English. But at the same time, and maybe this is a topic for another conversation in the future, it seems like if you really want to communicate with someone deeply, it's easier to do it in English than in Japanese. Now, that's just my personal opinion. You are someone in a very unique position where you have no problem communicating in either language. Do you think that that's true? Like, would you prefer to communicate in English as opposed to Japanese? Or what are the pros and cons?
I think to communicate complex ideas, ambiguous concepts, it's more easier for me to pin down the concept in English. I have more vocabulary to do that, partly because I studied anthropology, but it's academia, right? It's not for the daily conversation. And in Japan, I I think the majority of Japanese people don't share the academic common vocabulary to illustrate ambiguous concepts. So yeah, it's easier for me to explain these things in English for me.
That's really interesting that you would choose that as an example, because my understanding of Japanese is it's inherently an ambiguous language.
Mm.
So I'm going to share a story, and it's not my story, but I think it's just such an excellent story to illustrate what I mean here. It was something that Kana told me the other day. She went into the office space of where she works, and she had a document that she needed to file it. So there was a place to punch holes, and there was a place to put the file in the shredder. Okay, so she walked in and she said to the person, "Onegai shimasu," which is like, can you handle this for me, please, right? Like, but it's such an ambiguous but very, very normal way of asking someone to do something for you. So what do you think happened?
What happened?
It got shredded.
Okay.
Right? Like, you needed to put the holes in it, but she didn't specify that. In her head, it was super obvious. And she thought, by context, looking at what it is, obviously I'm not going to shred this. Without, sorry, I'm being vague too, without giving too many details of what this paper was actually. But luckily it was one of those things where it's easy to get an extra copy. But like, imagine if there was like only that one copy, and you go and you're like, "Onegaishimasu," and someone shreds it. And you're like, "Oh my god, like that was really important. What happened?"
I mean, it's situational language, right? I mean, this is cheesy, but kuki o yomu.
Right. So the so-called reading the room or reading the air. Do you want to explain what that means?
So kuki o yomu literally means reading the atmosphere. So it's a form of non-verbal language, and it's not even gestural. It's the like undertone of that space.
That sounds so complicated. How do you understand, though?
I think this is kind of like pattern recognition as well.
Okay.
So you're in a certain time and place, and you're talking to someone, but you're trying to convey non-verbal language. So this does come back to honne to tatemae.
Okay. Do you want to explain those concepts? You're going real anthropological. It's good. It's good.
Honne to tatemae. So in Japanese, there's honne, which is truth speaking, like
your real opinion.
Your real opinion, and tatemae is like a facade. Like it's like a socially acceptable posture.
Okay. Yep.
So there are these two sides of the same coin, but depending on the situation and the person you're talking to, one thing may mean the opposite of one thing.
That's very hard to understand.
Kind of like sarcasm. So when you say something to me and I say sure.
Okay, right. It sort of depends on the tone. It sort of depends on maybe the context of the situation.
Yeah.
Right. I see. Do you find that this kuki o yomu, reading the atmosphere, does it lead to miscommunication, or do most Japanese people in most situations get it?
I think to a foreigner it's difficult. There's obviously a lot of cultural cues, and I think I had a hard time like understanding that, because English is very verbal and written. I think, and you need to say something with precision if you want to get yourself through. But in Japanese, when you say are toka, kore toka, like
this, that,
yeah,
right?
It somehow gets through. Or if you're in a group meeting, there's somehow like a group agreement when there wasn't a specific agreements.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I have an example of this that has always kind of bothered me, but being in Japan for so long and going through like university and then going through being at a company or a Japanese company, which I'm still at a Japanese company. This, how much time is wasted where you're like in a big group of people and you need to make a decision. I'm going to give a really specific example. Sure. You just had dinner and everyone's standing around outside of the restaurant deciding, are we going to do a nijikai? Like, are we doing a second party, or are we going home, or what's happening? Like, the amount of time that is wasted with nobody being able to make a consensus there is like, it always used to drive me nuts. It's just like, let's just do something or not do something.
So like making a decision, right?
Right.
I say every time it's wasted.
Every time, right? I mean, this is kind of a running gag that you and I have about.
But here's the point: it's not wasted. It needs to be wasted in order to turn it into value.
Okay, that's really interesting. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
So, I sent you this meme maybe some time ago, and there's this guy in a meeting room speaking to the other members and saying, I'm not convinced that we've wasted enough time on this subject.
Right, yeah.
Right.
This is totally Japan.
Yeah, that cracked me up. Yeah, that's a true story. So, wasting enough resources until everybody's convinced.
Okay, that's really interesting. So you're positing here that this time that everyone is kind of sacrificing in order to get to this consensus is necessary in order to achieve the group approval, or like it's kind of a waiting game, maybe. Like,
yeah,
instead of convincing everyone, it's just like, I'm going to kill you with boredom until you just agree with me. Is that right?
Sort of. That's how I feel.
That's really interesting.
If your group wasted enough time, it's already too late to go home. And then stick around. Otherwise, why not, right?
That's really interesting. I think that your interpretation is definitely not wrong. I think it's definitely accurate a lot of the time. Okay.
It's also a competition, right? So it's a necessary process as well as it's a waiting game. So it's a competition. So no one wants to make the decision. Someone makes the decision. Okay, cool. You're paying.
Right. All right. How about some final thoughts about your vision for the future, where you see yourself? I don't want this to be like, where do you see yourself in 5 years, but like, do you feel like you're going to live in Japan for the rest of your life? Is there any desire within you to go abroad again? We talked a little bit about feeling of belonging and so on and so forth. What do you see and what do you feel looking forward?
Well, career-wise, I haven't talked to you about my career in this session yet. So I work as a data engineer, so it's something like a software programmer, and I don't have to choose where I work. At least as a skill set, it's doable anywhere.
Pretty transferable to any country these days, right?
So the question is, would I have to, like, if I can do it anywhere, like, I don't have to be in Japan, or I can be in Japan.
Right.
So it comes up down to where I want to live, right? But specifically, I don't have anywhere else to. I don't have the desire to live anywhere else for a long term. So I think I'll set my bones in Japan.
I mean, why not, right?
Yeah.
If it's comfortable and you enjoy being here, then I think that's as good enough a place as anywhere. I mean, I love being here, so. Okay. There are so many other things that we could talk about, and usually our conversations go for about like 2 or 3 hours. So this is like a quick one today. Yeah. But let's put a pin in the conversation for now. And before we go, do you have any final thoughts? Anything else you want to say? Anything you want to ask me? Or anything, for example, that you want to plug or advertise, I know that you recently just started a new Instagram page based on liminality, kind of like an artistic project you've got. Do you want to say what the name of that is? If anyone's interested, they can follow you.
Yeah, so I have an Instagram account called Liminal Ideas, and what it is that I take random pictures of small, dark, narrow alleys.
The places we like to hang out.
Yeah. And mainly in Tokyo, some in remote areas of Japan, and just post pictures of streets.
Yeah, as like an atmospheric theme, I think you've really captured it, and it does have a really nice range of different Japanese scenery. So if people are into that, I think it's definitely worth checking out. All right, well, let's wrap it up there today then. Thank you again for coming on, Naoya. Always a pleasure. We touched on some really interesting topics, and I think those are ideas that we can definitely develop more in the future. I'd love to have you back on for another conversation, hopefully sooner than later. So I guess I'll see you then.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.